begin our work session on cross-access easements and RV parks. Who wants to start?
Well, Commissioners, which one do you want to start with? The cross-access easements or RV park? Cross-access easements,
Okay.
As you know, cross-access easements were put into place in 2020. They were intended as private drive developments. There was no maximum number of lots that were decided in that particular part of the resolutions. The original standard doesn't allow more than one connection to a public roadway. Staff proposed through a series of work sessions and study sessions, both with this body and the Planning Commission, that a cap be put on those lots so that the road network was not negatively impacted by multiple developments that use the CAE process. The Planning Commission agreed, and that was brought to you for approval. As part of this, we would like a little feedback on allowing commercial uses on CAEs. Road standards may not be designed for commercial trip generation from the engineer of record. Current states that CAEs are for rural residential only. We have a few SUPs out there that would be impacted by that decision. So we need some guidance from you at the end of this, how you want to see that applied. And with that, we would open it up for your questions. Again, we've had...
Okay, you got anything, Mike?
Not right this second.
Well, we're limited to 8 right now, and what are we talking about if we go over the 8 or on a variance? I mean, would it have to be a PUD? Or, I mean, is that something that is possible, that it could be a PUD to go over 8?
PUDs wouldn't affect this particular ruling, so PUDs are standalone developments. If it's going to be operated under a CAE with the rules of a CAE, it would be capped at 8 under what is currently law.
So
okay.
We had chatted about this, about just ideas, but potentially that if you had if you allowed, not totally restricting it to 8, but if you exceeded 8, you would put in a higher standard of requirement for the road.
Sure, I think the spirit and intent of the regulation is to protect the road system so that you can actually hook a public road up to one side or the other of a CAE that's in excess of 8 lots. Even though it's a private road, at some point in time, if the county had to come in and take that road over, it would be built to a current standard, the subdivision standard for a local road.
Commissioners, I don't know if Bill was here when we originally discussed this. I can't remember. I think it may have been even before then. So I might be the only one that's here that was part of all those conversations. We had multiple work sessions on this. The idea of the cross-access easements was that really the county, we would prefer not to get into the practice of maintaining subdivision roads.
Exactly.
Because our equipment's really not set up for that. We're set up for nice, long, straight roads, as straight as they can be in Leavenworth County. Not for these small subdivisions. Our equipment doesn't do well. It takes a lot of time. So that's why the cross-access easement process started. There were no original limits placed on them. And I think the challenges back then that we identified at the staff level were we envision a Bear Lake style of subdivision when we're talking about these things, which I think everybody can agree is a success. But it opens up the potential for something a lot different. And I'm not going to go into all those details. But so there has to be some kind of a balancing act. From a staff's perspective, we still support whatever it is the board wants to do. Understand that a limit is there for a reason. However, at the end of the day, what the commission wants to accomplish at that time was, I guess, easier development. Mm-hmm. So we're just looking for guidance. Is the 8, where we just approved the 8, is that where you want to stay? Was that kind of an oversight thing where we want to go back to where we were before? I know some of the challenges that we have from a public works perspective is not every engineer understands or wants to comply with I think the guidelines says it has to be a stamped roadway.
Yeah, so currently I was I was here during the initial discussions. They, I think, occurred in 2020 because Commissioner Shimke was here during that period of time, I believe. But so I believe the direction of the board was that they wanted to look at alternatives to the cost of the county road standard roadway and allow for a development to occur that was to a lower standard privately maintained road that would allow some of these subdivisions to go in with a lower cost of installation. The county doesn't really want to be in the business of maintaining subdivision roadways. People in those areas generally want a city service, even though they're living in the county. And so it just allows them to develop a different cost point and allows them to pick their level of service. But yes, it would, if they were to be required to build to a county standard when they build more than 8 lots, there would not be a economic advantage to a developer or a family wanting to develop those lots at that point, because if you're going to build it to a county standard, the future perpetual maintenance of that roadway being out of the county is a financial benefit to the future property owners. And so if you make the requirement of more than 8 lots to require that to be built to a county standard, then there really isn't a financial benefit to a cross-access.
So, okay, let's take the county standard thing and talk about that for a second, and you can help me understand. What would be the difference if we said beyond 8 houses, it has to be hard surfaced, as opposed to beyond 8 houses, it has to be up to a county standard?
Well, the hard surface and to a county standard are way different. The county standard no longer includes chip and seal roadways, which would be considered hard surface. It no longer, it has requirements for testing, and so you would have construction engineering inspection. You can do 4-inch bases without that don't allow for nuclear density testing, and pave 4 inches of asphalt instead of 6. There's all kinds of different ways you can build a roadway.
So the roadway at Bear Lake, are you familiar with those, how they're built? Have you been out there?
I mean, I've been out there, but I have no idea. I have no idea how they're built.
But they're pretty narrow. They're not. They're definitely not up to a county standard, but they're very nice, paved or hard surfaced.
You don't know what the weight limit is or how.
I don't, and I don't. They're not up to any kind of. I'm sure they're not up to any kind of a.
Well, you'd have to design a roadway, and this is. I alluded to it last week and presented some of that, a little bit of the information when we discussed minimum maintenance roads. So anything more than 2 lots kicks you into a roadway designation that requires you to have a design. That design has to meet fire access standards and engineering standards. Currently, the lowest standard possible is that very low volume road standard that AASHTO put out. And I didn't bring that information with me here today, but I had it last week for the minimum maintenance road discussion. But there is a standard that is a very low volume road standard that has both aggregate and hard surfaces in them for any roadway which the federal government considers very low volume, less than 400 vehicles. That I believe allows for a 22-foot lane.
So that would be the, like, if we just adopted and we said beyond 8 houses, you have a hard surface requirement and not to county standards, that would be the standard they would have to build to.
That would be the standard that they should use.
Well, I mean, we would put that in effect as a requirement, right?
Well, we're not, currently we do not review from a public works standpoint the engineering design of the actual roadway. We look at the drainage report because that affects off-site development, and we look at the connection to our existing roadways as part of our review, but we do not look at we would not have accepted some of the cross-access easements from a public works review standpoint, probably, and we do not look at these from an review to AASHTO standards. Generally, it's a private development.
So if we had a rule that said beyond 8 houses, you have to have a hard surface, we wouldn't even review it.
We currently don't. We could review it.
I
if
mean,
you
no,
said-
what I'm saying is, under our current rules, if we allowed beyond 8 houses, you just have to have a hard surfacing.
You still have to have a design. You
Right.
have to have an engineer review it. You have to have an engineer design it. But the county does not review any roadway plans for the cross-access easements. We look at the stormwater and we look at the entrance point, but we do not review the design standards used by the engineer who stamped the roadway.
And that would be if we moved ahead and had allowed for more than 8 houses, and we said it had to be on hard surface, and we didn't specifically state county road standard. That's the standard that we go to. Is this very low standard of the
It's the lowest standard that I'm aware
Right.
of. There are some other standards out there. If you look, like I did a lot of research when we were talking about minimum maintenance road. There are some federal wildlife and parks roadway design standards that were developed sometime in the 90s. There are a few other things that an engineer could possibly use as a design guideline, but the most widely accepted standard is the AASHTO standards. And in
Which-
2001, they came up with the very low volume road standard, and they have not amended that standard for very low volume roads since.
So the issue, and I'll stop talking, but so the issue is we have this kind of arbitrary
Daddy won't.
8 house restriction, 8 lot development restriction. If we're going to lift it, we have to decide if we're just going to flat lift it, or if we lift it, we put some requirements because you're going to have a lot of extra houses.
Yes. And
There you
if
go.
you're going
That's
to,
all I have to say.
If you're going to lift it, the other thing that would be brought up in a lot of discussions that was brought up in the past when we discussed cross-access
Right.
easements originally was, does it have to meet the surface type of the roadway that it's intersecting? So that was one of the.
That was the
That
original.
was
the
one of
original.
that was one of the things, and it looks like Commissioner Culbertson recalls that. Should
Yep.
all cross-access easements that are coming off of a hard surface road be required to be hard surface, no matter their size, or
But not to a county
but not
standard.
to a county standard, just to some sort of stamped design standard that an engineer would say is acceptable, or are we going to allow gravel? And it was decided at that time that they would allow gravel. They did not. Your direction was we'll allow anything that an engineer will accept.
Which gravel, if you're building less than 8 houses, like we talked about like a family building 2 or 3 houses, gravel makes a heck of a lot of sense. But if you're going to start building a large development,
Makes no
then
sense.
it makes more sense to have additional rules.
We'll use Ackerland Hill as an example. Ackerland Hill, I believe, is a 14 lot subdivision currently on County Route 30, 235th Street between Dempsey and 4H Road. It is a gravel roadway, cross-access easement. If we pave that road, say, in the next 5 years, like has been approved in the capital improvement plan, we will have a 14 lot subdivision that is gravel off of a cross-access easement, accessing a brand new paved roadway. So you will build out in some of these areas because people generally want to be near hard surface roadways when they're splitting up land. Exclusive to Garden Villa, all of them are on hard surface roadways, and so generally the public is going to want to have that level of service when they are buying 2.5 to 5 acre lots.
I think the challenge has always been on these that the people who move in, the people who sign off on that paperwork are not typically the people who live in those subdivisions. So the cross-access easements are done by the developers. The people who move in there then end up invariably in front of the county saying, we want you to pave our road, and we have to remind them, that's a private road. We're not, you have to bring it up to the county, the current standard at that time, before we'll accept it. And Commissioner Doug Smith has pointed that out numerous times, and the challenge is always, in the future, are the commissioners going to stand firm? We have a subdivision. We have a subdivision that's been in multiple times asking the county to take it over. It's a private road,
Yep.
and we've stood firm. We're not doing it because it is a huge cost difference, especially after the fact.
That's right.
To bring
That's
it up,
key.
and in that case, there's
That's
not even
key.
the ability because they didn't leave the right of way to make it and the slopes and everything else.
And
Most of
nothing
those
was
lots would have been
designed-
unbuildable
Right.
had we made them build the road to a county standard.
Because nothing
So,
was designed for that.
That's the challenge, and I know this commission will stand firm, believe that future commissioners would too, but it's a decision that this commission has to make today to kind of tell us where you want to go.
Well, I don't want Public Works to have to take over any more roads than they have to. They've got enough roads to take care of, and I think that was why I supported the cross-access easement and the private roads, just so Public Works does not have to maintain these. And, these have all got to be set up with HOAs. Am I correct on that?
You are?
They are. They all have to have HOAs, so there's money for maintenance.
Yeah.
Hopefully, there's enough money for maintenance.
But
Hopefully, the HOA just takes care of the roads and doesn't tell everybody they got to paint their house a certain color or anything like that.
But even if the HOA,
They've been known to do
that.
Well, but the road maintenance is the main thing. It's the snow removal, it's the re-graveling, it's having people be able to get access in and out. And we'd gotten a letter from the fire department on our minimum maintenance road. I mean, they've got to be built to some kind of a standard. Because just as soon as there's a problem, they'll be wanting the county to go in there and do something.
And that's the issue.
Whether it's a major snowstorm and they can't get out, or we get a season where it just rains and rains and rains and they can't get out and emergency personnel can't get in. They've got to understand this is a private road and it needs to be dealt with like that, and the taxpayers do not need to be subsidizing it. If you choose to live there, you choose to live there.
And to buy there.
Yeah, I don't
build
have,
there.
and I don't have an issue down the road telling somebody that no, that's a private drive. I'm sorry, but you bought it that way. Buyer beware.
As long as the deeds and
Sarcoxy
plat
Lake is
and
a good
everything
example
else
of that.
explains it really well.
Yeah, Sarcoxy Lake's a good example of that. The HOA for Sarcoxy Lake is almost non-existent anymore, but
Don't
they
need to
banded
be.
together and they got
Paid to pay the roads. They did.
so it's on them.
So from a planning standpoint, really the two elements that we are most concerned about is that you only have one access point in a CAE. There's no way to connect that road on both ends. You get one connection point, so essentially a cul-de-sac. And two, the street network that is built typically as subdivisions occur. So when subdivisions occur, cross streets normally happen every 750 to 1,200 feet. That's what the regulations require. So those are the development zoning impacts from this. So if it's limited to 8, typically we're not going to run into that cross access element. Essentially, it's one long cul-de-sac, and we accommodate for larger lots. That was the purpose of breaking it off at 8, since that's a demarcation of major and minor subdivision development. Major subdivision development, you're going to have the cross streets, you're going to have the intersections, the interconnectivity to two different roadways that the subdivision may connect one side to the other side, and it needs to be public. So if it's not public, then we need to have the ability to have a roadway that would meet the criteria to support that kind of traffic load.
Exactly.
So your concern with if we exceed the 8 and allow developers to build however many houses they want would be that we're trying to eventually connect this road system into the road system of, say, Base or whatever community you're in, and that if we don't very carefully consider our like if you don't have the road up to a certain standard, that's going to make it a lot more difficult.
I agree. It's curious that you bring up Basin, but any town, let's say an annexation comes through and you have CAEs adjoining that particular annexation, well, that will certainly impact, I would think, the annexation policy of that adjoining community. So subdivision construction, in and of its nature, does build these road networks. Without the road networks, you don't have the ability to get EMS in, you don't have the ability for fire. It makes it much more difficult. So again, the higher density development, more than 8, to me, needs to have some kind of standard, yeah.
John, what's the largest contemplated subdivision? in
80
the county?
lots.
80 lots.
Mhm.
So, and there could be bigger than that.
Sure.
So imagine a subdivision of 80 lots that's only a cross-access easement. And I'm not saying it was, I'm just saying it could be a cross-access easement. that's not following any of the interconnectivity rules.
Right.
So they have one way in, one way out. They have no crossroads. You got to drive a big circle. Now, some people might be okay with living that way, but what does it do from a future development and a safety standpoint? Those are the things that we look at in this. And, is it our role? I mean, that's the other question. Is it really our role? Some things are buyer beware. If you want to live in that subdivision, you take that on. But a lot of people moving into our community are moving from, I won't name the county, but a county that's very developed and they have a lot of rules and restrictions. And when they move here, it's the same way with, like we talked about with building codes. They have this assumption that this development has been built with certain guidelines in place. And in these cases, they're not.
That's right.
And so when you buy that $750,000 home, and you have a cross-access easement, you have to understand that you maintain that roadway, so when it starts failing, you and your neighbors have to figure out how to fix it. First 5 years is probably not a big deal, unless it's really poorly designed. But 10 years from now, it's a big deal.
Yep.
Expensive.
Assumptions,
And then it
life's
doesn't
lowest
stop
form
people
of
from coming
intelligence.
after us.
Yeah, that's
the
what.
commissioners.
That's the catch.
We're the sixth largest county in the state. And I think we still view ourselves as a backwater rural county like we were 50 years ago. But people are moving in here, and if we don't think these things through really carefully, we're going to have a mess. And
I think, Mike, it's right. It's buyer beware, but at the same time, government is here to assist in these situations. So it's basically what you're saying. I agree with what Vicki said. I agree, but we just can't turn a blind eye to it. I think there has to be some things to give some kind of guidance of where we're at.
Bill, would we allow? So let's say it's a subdivision coming in and they're going to build it to a county approved standard. I don't like when we say a county standard because really we're using AASHTO. So a county approved standard. Would we allow them to use the very low maintenance as meeting that county approved standard, or would we make them build into it?
Our standard meets that very low standard, and so
Very low volume.
AASHTO standard. Our standard meets that standard. So it's just we're defining what that standard is for our community through our development guidelines and our road development guidelines. So different areas, depending on the type of traffic you have and the number of vehicles, there is a wide acceptable range of what is considered a very low volume road standard. So there's a range from 10-foot lanes to 12-foot lanes with shoulders, depending on traffic count and use and the weight of the vehicles that are going to use it. So there is more than one roadway that you could design underneath that standard. We have picked a cross-section and a design standard that is within that range and said this is what we expect is our minimum. And so we fall within that threshold of what is acceptable, but there are other roads that could be designed at, in some cases, at a higher volume and a lower volume or heavier weight that would be beyond our standard.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is some of the subdivisions that have come in recently that they've put in public roads. Mm-hmm. Do they fall in that area where it would be a very low volume?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. They're all very low volume.
So if there's no cost savings for using that from a developer, their only issue is if they want a private road.
Well, there would be an option for cost savings because of that threshold. Under very low volume roads, you can design to an aggregate surface level. You don't have to have a hard surface roadway. Our standard that we set forth is a cross section with 6 inches of pavement and a certain amount of base rock. Underneath that low volume road standard, you could design 10 inches of AB3 compacted to a MR90 compaction and design a gravel road with 4% cross slope and shoulders and complete a professionally engineered design to a lower standard than what the county accepts for subdivisions. Is that what you're asking? Like, there is a cost. There are options out there.
I'm trying to figure out if there would be any motivation if we did do that standard. There wouldn't really be any motivation cross-access easement.
No, there would still be the option of aggregate surface roadways, and you could even design a roadway with 4 inches of
But if
asphalt.
we did that's the bigger difference, like the 4 inches instead of the 8.
Mhm. Yeah.
But like Commissioner Stephen was saying, if you made them improve it over 8, they're going to have to pave it anyways.
Yeah.
So that's, where's the threshold? And, maybe we're trying to tackle this the wrong way.
So,
Maybe we're trying to tackle it the wrong way, in that
Everybody
maybe it's
still
not
isn't.
this threshold. Maybe
Bring it
it's,
up here.
maybe
Being that
it's,
guy.
at this level, you have to build it, and we put that maximum on there that you have to build it that the county's going to take it on. And if it's so you have this range, and also if it's under that threshold, we're not taking it. You know what I mean? So it doesn't matter how you
Yeah.
build your road.
Yeah.
If it's under 20 homes
Yeah.
or whatever, and I'm just throwing out a number.
Sure.
If it's under 20 homes, we're not going to take it because we can't justify the expense of maintaining that road.
Right.
So it
Yeah.
will be a private road, but you do still have to build it to the standard. So maybe that's the way to handle this. I don't know. I'm just throwing some ideas.
And again,
So-
with the 8 lots will not pay for that roadway. So a substandard roadway makes.
So another thing about what you said about tying it into the cities or tying it into the network is it seems like with our development plan, through the comprehensive plan, we try to get people to develop near the cities where the services are, where the infrastructure is. So would it make sense that we have a little different rule if you're building nearer the cities? We're going to definitely have this issue of connecting in with the network. It's going to come up really quickly.
Well, traditionally, you're going to have higher densities within the cities, which is going to give more count, which would produce a higher number and require the hard surface streets. The further you get away from those cities out into the county, the lots tend to get much, much larger, but the counts are typically 8 or less and a much larger lot. So you may have the same road miles, but you're going to have a lot less lots to pick from. So as you get out into the county, those 8 lots make a lot of sense for a quarter mile of roadway for, say, a family that's going to split off lots for their children.
but Bear Lake still has access to County Road 2 and 166.
Bear Lake is PUD. CAEs have their own animal.
They are.
So they have one connection. PUD can be connected, but that has to be worked out during the development plan process.
And I don't have any of the numbers here before me today, but I would say it's safe to say, to Mark's point, that if you build a quarter-mile long roadway that's 1,320 feet long, and you put 8 houses on it and then build it to a county standard, that depending upon if you just look at the average house in Leavenworth County, it's not going to pay. You're going to have to subsidize that road's maintenance in the future with other roads, with other houses or other taxation matters. Because if you allow only at a certain density does a road become self-supporting. And so that's the same with why they want 30-acre lots in cities, is because you got to pay for the road, you got to pay for the sewer, you got to pay for the water.
Right.
And so they get that higher the density, the more taxation you can get. So there is a threshold, I don't know what it is here today, of how many houses and at what value you need those houses to be at before that subdivision roadway becomes self-supporting and you have a positive taxation gain from the development of the subdivision.
So there'd be a difference, though, between a $450,000 house being built and a $750,000 house.
That's the problem from an analysis standpoint of how many houses over what stretch of roadway is you're projecting what that house value will be in a certain area and how many you would need in order to pay for the future maintenance of the roadway.
And there's no way to give an accurate number on that countywide. In my view, there's no way to give an accurate number from front to
So
back.
if we exceed it just seems like to me, if we're going to allow exceeding 8, then you need to have.
Standard that is approved and developed and consistent. I mean, there needs to be consistency. You can't say,
So
well,
8 and under would make sense, cross-access easement.
Yep.
8 and over, you do a PUD.
Or build a standard subdivision.
Regular.
But is there a threshold that, from a county's perspective, that we want to say, hey, we're we're out of this until you hit, like, we're not taking on your road. And I'll have to defer, obviously. We'll have to look this over if that's even, we can legally do that. But we want to say, hey, if you're under 20 homes, it's a private development, and we're not maintaining the road. I mean, is that something that the commission wants to look into? I just threw that out today, so.
Well,
we'll
I
have
think
to
it's
do
something we really need to look at because
We need to
we
analyze
can't
it.
afford to take over,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, we do.
like you said, a small area like that.
And Commissioner Stevens' point about the $750,000 home, I've made this going back to the first time we talked about this. 3 homes in the city at $300,000 generate more taxes than one $750,000 home on a 5-acre tract.
That's right.
And so those 3 homes are on 1 acre. So for that same 5-acre tract, I can get 15 $300,000 homes. It's that density that makes it sustainable. And I do not want to discourage development in the county. I'd like to see those homes coming in. I wish that the lot layouts were a little bit different to allow for future development, but they're good things. I mean, we have good growth going on. We want to continue that growth. So we also have to make sure that we do something that, while it protects us in the future, it doesn't completely just put the brakes on what's already happening.
And one thing to keep in mind, what you saw 3 to 4 years ago was much less dense development than you're seeing now. You were seeing, 8 lots to 15 lots. Now we're seeing 20, 30, 40, 80 lots. So those are galaxies different from a development standpoint and an improvement standpoint.
Growth.
Yes.
So when you're up near
But we
base
need to
or
do
up
it
in the
properly.
city, it's 1 acre. I mean, even under the comprehensive
You're right.
plan, we have the 1 acre. I mean, it's
You gotta
not
have
a
the
plan that's
standards.
2.5 or 5.
Yeah, in the comp plan, it calls for 3 units an acre, which you can't achieve without public sewers. But on a private sewer system, yes, the highest density you can get is 1 acre.
But we need to do.
But still, we got to
consistency.
decide on this 8
We need to be
versus
consistent. We need to
what-
have a standard.
If we're going to allow above 8, and what's the rules going to be?
Which is
Yeah.
exactly what the Planning Commission discussed during their meeting. They had a virtual identical discussion as what you're having here today. And the idea here is to keep consistency within your regulations, and 8 is the break point on a number of items.
Yeah.
And again, as we'll get into in the RBs, we're trying to keep those numbers consistent throughout the document, so we don't have opposing timelines.
So obviously, I don't think we're going to make a decision today, but I would like to hear what the developers, what's the thoughts from the folks that are actually building the homes. Do you have any thoughts?
Most high-end developers aren't doing cross-access easements anyway. They're doing public roads because they don't want the headache of having to take it over or having to maintain it, or their clients to have to maintain it when they buy the house. When you get into the number of lots, a couple things up here said we're using Mark for 20 lots. Might be a little much, but on a cul-de-sac, you get 20 homes. On a 1,300 20-foot road that John brought up, at 2.5 acres, you get 15. Maybe 15 is a more logical number to go for cross-access. You think of at 200 feet, cul-de-sac hole, you can get that many. I don't know what the threshold is of that you guys.
But that's what we need to analyze.
But we can never take that over.
You're putting 8 houses versus 15, let's just use that. You're increasing your taxes. You're also increasing the ability to share in the maintenance of that road, whether it's a low volume gravel, which I think is important to have as an option for cross-access. Or if they do decide to hard surface it at a later time.
So are developers not, what you're telling, what I'm hearing from you is developers are tending to not be that interested in cross-access easements.
It's not the normal developers that are doing your roads, it's the ones that are doing the cross-access easements are
Small.
family farms, not for family members, but they're doing it, hey, I want to develop, I don't want this person to come in here and make all the money. I want to do it myself, how can I do it? And the cross-access easement allows the individual person an opportunity to develop their own property.
So if
I've talked to a lot of the developers. I talked to the same people that Joe represents on a very consistent basis, and they are aware of the cross-access easement allowance prior to this subdivision amendment, and none of them showed any interest in developing the roadway. They don't. They feel like if they're going to develop a roadway and pay for the roadway to be built, they don't want to have the headache of if their lots don't sell, are they financially responsible perpetually for a portion of this lot? So, because you have that risk involved, and you have the risk of if this roadway fails before I get all these lots sold, how much is this going to cost me? And so and then their lot value is diminished because the person is going to have to perpetually pay a special assessment for the road, and so their land value is decreased. They want to maximize their land values and have the least amount of future risk, and that's what they have said to me repeatedly, is they don't have, unless they're going to go to a very high-end subdivision where they want to gate it, a gated community, they don't have any interest in that future potential risk of developing a cross-access easement subdivision.
I think that's exactly what you
Yeah.
said.
So, but you don't support the 8 limitation.
Not that I don't support it, I've had great conversations with staff and I understand their point of view on it. The limiting of it, just if you give twice as many houses on the road, you get more taxes. Why are we limiting it if an individual wants to come in and do a quarter-mile road and give 15 houses on it?
Well, 15 houses is a lot different than, I mean, if we open it up, I mean, we could change the number from 8 to 15, but if we just flat out open it up, then it's going to bring issues on the road and maintenance.
It's been opened up since day one. You have one cross-access easement, flat, that has 15 lots. That's the maximum you've had seen. It has some road issues. The county has now made the plans to be a full set of engineering plans, like they should be from the get-go. You're probably not going to see that type of road constructed again. So I think we've answered that problem.
So it's not an issue.
I don't think it's an issue.
John, you got anything else on this?
Wait till Joe's done.
No, yeah, Joe's done.
Big developments come in this process as easements.
I would agree, and I've been doing this a long time, and traditionally, Bill and Joe are both right. Larger developers that are
Did you
building,
both say you agree?
for a moment, yeah.
We all agree.
So at the end of the day, yeah, this doesn't affect larger developers that are doing 60, 80 lots, but at 20 lots, that's a pretty significant impact. The bigger issue is what do the 14, 15 lots do to your local street network? So yes, you're planning for your one farm and you're getting your 15 lots. That might be in the center of 2 sections of roadway that have to be interconnected. Now you have a CAE in between those 2. That kills that connectivity of that entire roadway that's been put in place over the last 15 years and been maintained. How do we address that? There is no way to address that but go around that particular property. So again, when we limit it to 8 lots, we really do what the intent of that CAE is, and that's to allow for family planning and to address the giving of property to children and being
Which I
able to
think
plat
is
that
what the
without
intent
bringing.
was.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
we talk a lot about how Topeka makes rules that apply to the whole state that don't make sense to every part of the state. And I think that the development close to the cities versus the development, and I'm not trying to degrade any part of the county because they all have their values. And I would much rather live in some of these other areas, but like up by an Easton where development just isn't happening, the likelihood that we're ever going to deal with that issue is very small. The likelihood that we're going to have to deal with it around a Baser or a Lansing or a Leavenworth within a certain area, a lot higher. Tonganoxie, same way. So maybe that's something that has to be taken into consideration here too. It's not a one-size-fits-all for every part of the county. Maybe there has to be some consideration given on how close they are, whether we want to even allow that type of a development that close to the city.
Currently, CAEs aren't allowed within 660 feet.
Yeah, that's too
Yeah,
close. I mean,
that's
660, I know why we use that
Right.
number, but that's, I mean, no, I'm not aware of a city that's going to go annex a piece of property and only take 660.
I agree.
They're going to take further, so we probably need to extend that out, I guess is my point.
Sure.
Like the 3 mile area.
That's too far.
I know that's too
That's-
far, but that's a state
Yeah.
deal. But
that's what they'll allow for.
Yeah.
What's reasonable.
So really, when we talked about the cross-access easements back in 2020 or whenever we talked about it, we were talking about this whole trying to keep the development near the cities. But if you're not going to develop near the cities, you're going to go out, like way out in the country and do a development, garden villa or et cetera, et cetera. Now, you're going to be responsible for your own roads. And that was the intent, was that to try to let them know we're not taking over these roads where there's no services and we don't have a road network out in that area.
We haven't.
So I don't know if it always works out, but I agree that maybe near the cities the rules need to be a little different than far out in the country.
Well, that goes back to what Mark brought up last week, is we don't complete any traffic analysis for the impact on our roadways. So you use Garden Villas as a perfect example of a 45-lot subdivision coming off of a mile and a half.
We need to do that.
And so that's a whole nother discussion.
Makes sense.
Do you want to have some of your review process from Public Works perspective include some of these offsite roadways and the impact? Because there will be a huge
I think there
impact.
should
You could
be.
have 100 cars a day if that subdivision gets built out, added onto gravel roads for a mile and a half. That's a huge impact on those
Yep.
folks that live there currently.
And all the structures that are included in those
Yeah,
roadways.
so
Right.
you don't.
No,
we
I
did
think
not
we-
look at that as
We
part of that
should.
review process. But if
And
we
maybe
were to
once
look at
it's a
it,
certain size, then that triggers that
Right.
review takes place. And maybe that should be something to look at.
We can develop a number of criteria if that's what this body wants to see, and put those in a technical review component that Bill would operate out of, and then separate the land use components. So we're talking about two different things, and the review part of those processes. Typically in a technical review, the appellate body is this body. Typically in a land use review, that body is the BZA or the PC. So different rules for both, but certainly can be done.
So for today's purposes, with this 8, I think that's kind of what we need to decide. Is there a discretionary point at which we allow more than 8, or we want to stick with the
I
8?
think for the purposes that what we started it with, though, was for that thing of saying if you have family or stuff, that was what we were trying to accommodate. And I think that we should continue, in my opinion, down that road. I'm just,
Yeah,
Just
I
to
agree.
be clear, you established it at 8 right now.
Yeah,
That's what's in place.
Yeah,
right.
that's what's
I
in
said I
place.
think we should.
I think we should stay with that.
But
Now, I do think there's other things that we brought up that we need to, that trigger things down the line that we really need to take a serious look at, that Doug and Mike and Vicki have
Well, I
drawn up.
personally think we should develop some kind of a exceptional case scenario where we would allow it to exceed that. But that's
depending on how the ground lays, you
Yeah.
mean, or something like that.
Just
or
develop a policy
Or
or what road
proximity,
it's coming out on.
or proximity.
where,
Well, we
where
could-
we have discretion.
you need to be consistent. So then raise the threshold. Raise, instead of 8, go to 15 or whatever. I mean,
Right.
don't. I
Well,
mean,
okay,
they're-
then that's go to 15.
I'll let I'd like for your council to weigh in a little bit on that.
Okay.
Please.
So, the body has the burden of balancing all the needs of the county. You've got your development issues and then the effects on the roadway system.
Right.
But overarching with all of it, we have to be consistent. We have to have clear standards. And there may be a way to write something where you can have other considerations, but each time you vary from a consistent approach, you're opening the county up for liability and arguments that were arbitrary and capricious.
Yep.
You did it
And
for
those-
them, why don't you do it for us?
Right.
Exactly. The
That's what I
more-
said. We need to set. And if it's not 8, then what is it? But I don't think
Well,
that.
we
I
have
think
one
20 is
that's
too
already
much.
50.
I just.
And we've only had one.
It's
That's-
already 50.
And you've only done one over these 5 years.
Well, I think we've
It's
got,
not going to be probably won't be a run on
I
it.
think we have 3 different ones, and yes, 7 houses are the largest one, but I think we have 1 lane mile of private roadway based on the CAE currently.
But
None of
we
this
have
would
to plan for
impact
those
that.
contingencies.
So what I'd like to do then maybe is suggest that as a staff, we go back and revisit some of the things that were brought up today and try to come up with a policy that addresses some of those and bring it back for the commission in another work session to discuss. because I do think we've really come up with some pretty good ideas today. I like that we can maybe set the limit of 15 and under. You got to be a CAE. We don't, because Public Works, we don't want to take it on, but we need to limit where those things can occur.
Right.
And consistently limit it. So I'm not trying to be arbitrary in any way, shape, or form.
Or capricious.
And then
Give it a distance.
I'm never capricious. And then one of the other things is, and Joe brought this up at the beginning, we've kind of forgot about it, but that there should really be no commercial development on a cross-access
Absolutely.
easement that isn't considered home occupancy. So I think we need to maybe clarify that. And then I'd like to somehow figure in there the review of off-site impact for any development, not just
Yes.
these particular, but when we're putting in an 80-lot subdivision,
We need to look at the traffic.
we really need to be looking at how that impacts the local.
Absolutely, and future.
Absolutely.
So,
The other thing I would just put on the table, because I know when we started this whole discussion on cross-access easements, I'm just going to say my personal opinion is these should be hard surfaced, because you're trying to put them out in the county. They're supposed to be nice. It's a good development. Make them nice, and that's where we allow we should allow only cross-access easements if you're going to make the subdivision nice.
But then we need to look at what is, you need to define what is hard surface, because if it's 4 inches, it depends on the width of the
2
road, it
inches,
depends on the base.
chip
I mean,
and
there's so
seal.
many other things that you have to consider when you're saying it's a hard surface. Well, if it's a hard surface, it's not going to hold
Standard that Bill
up.
had, the minimum standard.
let's come up with some language.
Yeah,
See if we
I'm
can get
just-
something that the board-
Asphalt millings with some cutback oil on
Well, but you still, right, but you have to make those determinations, and then what does that mean? Because if the chance
Use motor
exists
oil.
that we might have to
No,
take
not
something
oil.
over,
Black paint.
and the base is crap, then you're starting from scratch. You're not building on something that is buildable.
I think with Bill's staff, like Mark said, I think they can present some solid technical specifications to you that would be
I think we
meet a
can come
minimum
up with
criteria.
something. I at least would like to draft a policy so that right now we're just theorizing what could happen. Let's get something onto paper that all
Yep.
of us have a chance to look through, including the counselor, and bring you back something in a work session so that we can maybe get some direction and finalize it.
So moved.
And it sounds like the most important thing that I've garnered from this today is really this is a very, very small issue in the big scope of things, because the developments
For
are
now.
being made at the standards.
So really, what's the
21.
spirit and intent of the regulation? Is it to accommodate family planning for small lots, to accommodate
I
the
don't know
kids?
about family
Or
planning.
is it to accommodate development? That's really the question.
Right, that's another question to answer. But it's also, when we say, well, right now, there's only this amount number, when you just made the comment that we're one of the fastest growing counties, that we are, the 6th largest, that over time, some of these things are going to pop up where you're going to have more and more. So there needs to be some planning in place, rather than be reactive. Plan for it, plan for the future, not say, oh, well, in retrospect, we should have, which we keep doing over and over again.
So the 3 things that I wanted to protect, or the catalyst that started this for me, was requiring hard surface roads in these little subdivisions off of gravel roads. That didn't make sense to me. If it's off a gravel road, you should have allowed them to have a gravel road in the interior roads. The second thing is protect the family splits. If the family wanted to split off 1 or 2 lots, that was hard to do before. And then the third bigger one is anybody who knows what they're talking about understands being development friendly is what lowers property taxes. So those 3 things I think still need to be addressed in the new
But I think they can be.
proposal. Yeah.
Put it to paper.
So just to bring up one more time, getting a consensus of opinion here on where do you stand on these CAEs and commercial uses. As it stands right now, our recommendation is you don't
No,
allow
not
commercial
unless-
uses, whether it's by SUP, unless
I
it's a home
agree.
occupation, as
business,
Mark said.
that's it.
I agree.
Yep.
Okay.
Does that include all the ones that you're now going to be licensing? Those will all be considered a home occupancy.
If it's home occupation and we license it, yeah, it wouldn't be applicable here. However, you have an SUP or there's a commercial component to it,
Yeah.
yes, it would.
Yep.
Especially since you come up with 4 different categories of SUP.
Right.
That's right.
I think that addresses that in itself. the right way. So, yeah. Okay.
Okay, good.
You have direction now that you need
I
it
think
from
we
us?
have good. I think
Clear
we have
direction.
We can get something pulled together and bring it back to you all. For
Okay.
consideration.
Okay.
All right, we'll move on to RV parks then.
Moving on to RV parks. When we, last year, we had several applications for specific parks that we do have actual regulations for recreational vehicles. However, we realized we didn't have a definition for recreational vehicles, which theoretically, that's where you base your regulation on. It's the first definition. So we started looking around surrounding counties and what their definitions were and found out pretty quickly that a good portion of these have expiration dates of 18 months. They had one that was 30 days, 6 months. So to get continuity in our regulation, we picked 12 months because traditionally we'll allow 12 months in an RV when you're building a house. And a number of items are at that 12-month marker. So that's why the definition for the RV park. Currently, you have several that exist in the county. Most are by SUP. They currently have a 2-year mark on them right now. We had one RV park that came in last year that also has a 2-year restriction on it. So our intent, which would not affect anything that's out there today and currently operating, would be that anything that comes forward would be 12 months.
So if you have somebody that's down in DeSoto working on the battery plant, and maybe their work time where they're living in the RV is going to exceed, what is the provision that we have under this policy for them being able to make a special exception application, or is there any kind of provision for that?
Well, currently in your zoning regulations, you could do planned commercial, which would require a development plan, and you could establish a timeline that exceeds 12 months. So it really depends on the underlying zoning category. You could also do a PUD. If you have a recreational area that wants year-round living there, even though the structures are not designed for that, you could accomplish that through a PUD.
Yep.
So that exists today.
They have to be, okay, say I'm a RV owner, and I come in and I'm staying somewhere. Once I hit the 12 months, then, I mean, unless the owner of the RV park has taken the action to do
Well, just to reiterate what you've heard many times before, we don't have a code enforcement action that is not complaint driven. As it stands today, we have no way to enforce even the 2-year element unless there is a complaint. So we're not going to be out there checking at 12 months. But right now, yes. I mean, they would be sent a letter and it would become a code enforcement action at
but
that
technically
point.
they'd be in violation of the
Technically,
law.
they would be.
We're not
Yes.
out chalking the tire.
We're not.
I just think that right now we need to kind of make some considerations because you're going to be dealing more and more with the boomers
Exactly.
who, I'm just saying, for
Sure.
whatever reasons, have made determinations in their lives that they're selling off their homes or whatever because
They're doing
of
it, yeah.
and
Taxes.
well, but whatever, and they're going with
Yeah.
trying to find some place that is defined where they can have their RV or their fifth or whatever it is, and that's their home base where that's where they're going to be. But then they can just take off and go
Leave.
someplace and then turn around and come back again.
So, and
I'm
that's not what this is. That's not what this is about. They can still do that in an area that's a RV park, something that has a PUD or has been licensed to do that. What this is to avoid is people who want to go out on their North 40 and live in an RV. That's what we don't
Okay.
allow.
And that's fine, but if you're in an RV park, you shouldn't have to move in a year.
And I don't think that requires that. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah.
In an RV park like a sun catcher or something.
Well, I mean, yeah, you do.
Unless
yeah,
it's
you do.
defined by your development plan or SUP. It
Right.
exceeds 1 year. So under a PUD, it might not be a year. It might be 2 years. It might be 5 years.
I don't quite understand that. Help me understand. So what Commissioner
That was
Smith
my
said,
concern.
you will have to, technically, under the rules we have now, unless they do a PUD or some other arrangement, they would have to physically move their RV.
They could only stay there for a year. So if they moved it for a day, the clock would kick back over. If we were out there chalking the tires, as Mark said,
But if
that's
they
not
have their
the intent.
utilities still connected to that, then they have to have their utilities shut off because they have water, they have power, all those things, and they have a meter. I'm just giving an example. And so that means they have to have all of that shut off and then turn around and have it turned back on again in order for it to click back on again.
Typically, in an RV setting, you don't have a utility bill. You plug in to a plug-in, you hook to a garden hose.
And which one
It
it is.
depends on which one it is and how it
Because-
is established.
Because they are transient in nature and the structures themselves are not intended to be lived in. They don't meet the criteria of a manufactured home according to the government. CFR 24, Part 3280.
I'm just looking at what
What
I'm
we got
looking,
going
trying
on.
to be. I'm just
Sure, and we have no problem keeping the RV parks open. We're simply saying that, and you're right, people do sell off their stuff and they travel from state to state to state, typically, and visit those places, which is why they buy
They
the
will
RV
have
so
home
that they can
base.
become mobile.
But they will have a place that is where they stay, like for the winter, or I mean, and
Sure.
or even back and forth. They return again. That is their home.
Sure.
That is their lot, whatever you want to call it. That is where they go to. It is designated for them. It's not sold off to somebody else or rented to somebody else. It is theirs. I'm just
Sure, I
getting
think
hypothetically
what you
speaking.
have to remember, like we were just talking about on the previous thing, though, is it's an all for one, one for all.
Right.
So you're envisioning something like somebody pulling in their nice RV that they've maintained and they keep up. From our standpoint, what we have to envision is the opposite of that, where somebody is living in something that probably should have been burned down 3 years ago.
But
Well, I think
No.
that's the
then can't
RV
you
park's
have- but the
problem
RV
to
park,
deal
okay,
with.
but with the
And
regulations
in
of
cities that
what we
have code
establish.
enforcement where they can go in and enforce some of those things, we don't. We can't. So our control on that is
But you can
And I don't
establish
have a
the
problem
age
on-
of whatever
on
that is.
Somebody
their-
on private property living in one, but I'm just saying the RV parks, that's their business.
And again, we have no issue with RV parks. We're trying to accommodate the same elements that almost everybody around us does by establishing a timeline, because by its very nature, it's considered transient, not permanent. So if you have a situation that you want to see permanent, 2, 3, 5 years, you want to buy the lot, PUD is the vehicle by which you get that done, and that exists today in your regulations. We could accommodate that today.
But we don't, some of these folks started out working at the dog food plants. Now they're down at DeSoto. Now they're talking about moving to the jobs at like the Mattel theme park, stuff like that. They aren't going anywhere. They
I'm just
want to
looking
stay
at,
in
like,
one
Suncatcher
spot,
Lake is
working
one
all these
place.
jobs.
And it has an SUV
And they
and a
spend their
PUD.
money here.
Okay.
What do our
That's how you
neighboring
know.
I did not know
counties,
that they had the PUD.
what do our neighboring
Going on
counties
Houston.
I was
require?
going to bring that in.
Amy?
So when we looked at neighboring counties, when they listed a date, most of them averaged between 30 days and 6 months when they actually listed. All of their definitions said that these were temporary living. So my assumption would be that they are not allowed to be there permanently. However, there were 2 counties that did allow for permanent RV parks. However, they had to have additional infrastructure in place to support permanent living, specifically a structure that accommodates washing and bathroom facilities as well as a storm shelter. We don't have anything in our regulations right now that requires that.
Do our current RV parks provide for storm shelters? Do we know?
No.
They do not.
They do not.
Does the houses being built in Tonganoxie call for it? They don't look like that.
Typically, residential
Storm
structures are not required to put
So,
in storm.
so I think personally, I think there's a lot of discussion that could go on about this because there's a lot of issues. But to resolve the issues for the workers at these various plants, if we just move it up to instead of 12, move it to 24 months, I think that would.
Well, that still isn't going to get it.
I'd say 60.
No, this is where we go
60
to the
months.
lake. The
5
other-
years.
Well, so
Yeah, this is the
I'm-
RV park. that
all
was
that's good.
Where we
I just want
have,
to make sure that
we lease,
something
but,
with the.
but each of us have to pay our own.
When we're talking
utilities.
about these transient workers coming in,
Yeah, I
whatever
know.
project,
I've seen
whatever
He-
project,
yeah, he does
whatever
same
project
thing
it
all
is,
over the place.
as we know,
But I'm just saying, it's like.
taxes are paid on those RVs
and
where they're
each-
parked on
there's-
January 1.
There's one at the swimming pool.
Allegedly.
Each has-
Allegedly, but nobody gets, we can't get boat tax money.
Right, so
There's.
what you're
access, there's
doing
washing machines,
potentially is
dryers,
encouraging a
and-
group of people who are going to
So I'm
live in your
saying,
county
that can
that
happen
will
with an
pay no
individual.
property taxes,
Here, there's,
likely,
but we don't allow it.
and impact your
Having this-
infrastructure.
Somebody comes in with a dumb thing that's going to fall down.
Can we
Right.
make, can
But
we,
see, in that park,
charge, well,
you're
can we
only
make
allowed
them
to have-
tag their vehicles here after so
I mean,
many
you have to-
days, 60
they have
days?
to-
Is there a law?
I think
They
by
have a
law they
maximum
have to,
number of
but
age-
by
they have an
enforcement,
age
I see
limit.
driving around with tags.
How old?
For years.
Not they.
So we got people living here
RV
anyways
or
not
the
paying.
trailer.
Oh,
Yeah. If it's over a certain age, it can't be in there.
I just want to make sure.
I know, we should
There's
be
a
able
lot
to
of
catch that,
stipulations you could put on
the
this
taxes
thing.
on boats at storage
Right.
facilities and campers and all that. We should be able to do that.
And we know the challenges we've had with that.
Well,
And
that
what-
would almost pay somebody's salary to go around and get the list of these.
They
It would
allow
pay
some of their
somebody's
property on January 1, or shortly thereafter.
Well, and then the RVs, if they're going to be parked, we don't have a problem with you parking here, but you need to tag it in this county.
Well, and
Some of the RVs cost more than people's houses.
Absolutely.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
So we're missing out on that.
What is the law about
There's several of them where we are
licensing
that
for such a?
$3 million.
It depends on where the person claims they are
I know if it was about
domiciled, and to be
750,000,
domiciled
that's
is
something
to
nice,
say
but-
that's
Oh
where
my
you
God,
intend
that's-
to remain indefinitely. So this is why kids who go to college and live in another state, they can still keep their Kansas tags if they're in Michigan for 4 years, because they have no intent to remain there indefinitely. So it somewhat depends on what the person articulates.
So we're not gonna. That's not a road we're gonna be able to. Well, I can see both sides of this. I don't know, 5 years. We don't really want to encourage a vast array of people.
Did you see it slowing down in 5 years around here?
But I mean, at one time, parking for, just say you could be here for 5 years and we're good with that. But I can see 12 months is very
short. Well, and the reason we need to address this because it's not a wave coming; it's a wave that's already here. Easton
Right.
City
Yeah,
trailer
it
park
is.
is completely full.
Right, that's
So
what I was
overnight,
targeting.
And you're going to see several parcels around there get
Yep.
annexed into the city of Easton here in the very near future because the idea
That's
took
what I
off.
was trying
So
to.
there's going to be several tracks turned
Well,
into
change.
RV parks around Easton.
Well, the stuff in the city is different. That's not.
But even
our-
in the
I know, but
county,
what I'm getting at is
if
it's
somebody
here.
wants to do
This
a
is something we
planned
need to
unit
address
development,
because
then
it's
it
already
is.
happening. So.
And we understand, we agree that it is here.
Yeah.
That's why we're trying to get ahead of the curve
Right.
before we react to this.
Right.
But again, just to reiterate, you have a vehicle in your regulations right now in a PUD that commits them to a development plan, which from a staff perspective is not
That
too
makes
much
sense.
to ask. That you commit to, this is what you want to do. You commit to this development plan for this period of time, and if you don't adhere to this development plan, then we have enforcement authority.
That makes sense.
Right before we passed this, which, by the way, you have
Okay,
already
okay,
passed this,
yeah.
this is where it stands today. Before we had this, we really had no regulation on it. You could do pretty much anything you wanted. Now, they are permitted in the commercial districts. They're under SUP for the residential districts, just to keep that in mind. So the SUP process is going to mimic in some ways the PUD process in that you have a public hearing, you have the ability to get specific on that particular development. So staff can direct people if they have extenuating circumstances to pursue a PUD like Suncatcher Lake did and accommodate their use through the existing things that we have in the regulations right
That
now.
makes sense.
If not, and it's a smaller 2 or 3 unit thing, then, again, that 12 months isn't unreasonable when weighed with all the surrounding counties. In fact, it's in excess of what traditional counties are prescribing right now. So that's why you have what you have before you. And again, if you have an exorbitant amount of RVs that are going to come into a particular area, like for Panasonic or whatever, then that can be accommodated through PUD. And if it goes away, the PUD is repealed, and that's it. You start over.
So we have a
That makes
rule
sense.
about if I'm building a house,
Mhm.
that I can have a
1 year.
1 year, but then there's also a provision that I can get an additional year extension.
That's
Yes.
true.
So right there, without
Continuing.
changing any of our rules, we could just add that to this and say you could get a 1 year extension if you have, and if you haven't, then maybe there should be a fine if it comes up as a complaint.
Well, that would be typically an interpretation, and if that's what this body, we don't need to change the text to make that happen. We can accommodate it with what we have currently. If that's your opinion, we can interpret it
I'm
that
just
way.
saying it's already there.
2 years is
But I
not
think
that.
that having
It's not
a,
That's
limited to
still
2
not-
years. You can just continually do it.
but having something that is developed and that is monitored, I mean, and asking, it's not asking too much for people that want to put in use their land or whatever to do a planned unit development that has a development plan so that it is not some kind of an eyesore or where, you're not going to attract the people that you're actually trying to
Well, I
accommodate.
think an RV park, they're going to be able to take care of that.
Right, but I said, but do it in a
That's why I
formal
said
way.
an RV park,
But not just a random.
armies of RV parks to Leavenworth County.
Right.
That's why it's regulated via the PUD.
That's
Right.
why I said to have it to where it is done in an organized fashion, but not have somebody that just says, okay, I've got 5 acres out here, come on over and park your RVs here for a year.
And that's the process
Or
you have
five.
set up now.
Or 5. Well, I'm just saying, that's
fine.
not what we're
I
wanting
agree.
to do.
But when it comes to an actual RV park, I don't think there should be any limit, or at least, like I said, 5 years.
Well, and they can do that with the PUD.
They can do it with the PUD, and you commit them to a development plan, which gives you an enforcement tool should they not conform to what it is you
That's the
wanted them
direction
to
we
accomplish.
try to go
So you
to.
would want the current RV park under
No.
PUD
UD.
if we're going to allow people to exceed.
To make them expand their park, yes.
Because right now, technically, they have to have people pull up their RV.
Well, technically, they are in a planned district, and in that planned district, this body allowed them to keep some of these RVs in
Right.
perpetuity. But that's a planned district, so you can accommodate that individually. A PUD is essentially a planned district. Planned unit development, it requires a development plan. So it can be accomplished either way. But now, right now, there would be no change to the existing parks out there unless they increase their footprint.
So that's now in place already with what we passed.
Right.
So the only except if we made a provision where they, and you could do this in-house, and say they could come and request an additional extension.
We can, yeah. If that is the intent of the body, I can do that
With-
administratively.
Why would you-
What you just said, though, John, was that the people who are already, so the existing RV parks in the county already have the ability to do this, to extend their space.
They were approved at 24 months.
Right. So if they had an approved timeline that was in excess of the 12 months, that would be their established timeline unless they change something in the footprint of their park.
So if they're already at 24 or whatever, it does not.
It does not
change that at
affect
all.
them. That's right.
So
Unless,
nothing really for them would change that hasn't already been there for the last 2 decades.
correct.
For most of them, because
Yep.
they've been around for a while. So it just doesn't, nothing has changed for those existing RV parks with this policy.
Correct. The only time it will change is if they expand their footprint.
So what if a member of John Q. Public has a friend or somehow comes in contact with some workers and he lives on several acres, he lets a park on his property for a year, and then they're still working at the battery plant in DeSoto, then if we change it, you could extend their time based on the fact that their work is not
I
completed.
think that's pretty much exactly what we were trying to avoid, Commissioner, and why we limited the people who are building their house to a year, so that we don't have residential properties with RVs that are there, people living on them for long periods of time. I think that's originally what this was trying to avoid.
But we're talking about people, we're trying to make an extension for people that are here temporarily.
So the additional year that you talked about is an extension of the building permit that falls under the building official, or in this case, the planning director, for just cause. In other words, you submit a letter, something happened, you couldn't build your project within that 12-month time period, so I needed extended for another year to accomplish that. That's the clause that you're talking about. It could be applied in a number of different areas, but if that's the intent, that you want them to be able to come to me and say, well, for this reason or that reason, I'm not able to relocate in 12 months, can I have another 12 months? There's
We
not
don't want
really...
that dragging out forever either. That could be something that
Right, so
But if
can
they're
you-
limited to 2 years.
It's not limited though now.
Yeah, well, it is now with 12 months.
Right.
So
Yeah, but you could ask for an extension as many times as you
if
want
you're
right
in the
now.
process of building a home,
You can only ask for it once. One time,
But
one
I
time
think-
only.
Is that new? Because it
No,
didn't used
that's
to be
the way it
that
is.
way.
No.
that's the way it's been.
It did not used to be that way 25 years ago.
Well,
so-
the advent of the building codes only allows one building permit extension.
Okay.
So assumably that came in at the same time you guys established building codes, but as I read it, it's one
Because I know-
extension, one
It
time.
seems reasonable to me that if they get 2 years
Because I got
and
seven.
then they still needed to be working
I got
here
7
that at least they're going to have to get their RV and they're going to have to
They didn't have a
move it.
limit on it.
You know, they can be 2 years. You're giving a long time. 2 years is a long time in an RV.
Well,
And think about we don't want to encourage this too much because there's tornado safety to think about. I mean, you don't want to just encourage people to be living that way.
Right, then that's the intent behind the regulation, to define it so that you can address all those things. So again, I don't think we need to change anything
No,
from
I
a
think you
textual
can-
standpoint. If that's the way
1
you
year
want to
to 1
interpret
year,
it,
and that's
that's
it.
the way we'll interpret
The
it.
extension's guaranteed, if the
I
extension's.
think RV parks shouldn't be any limit on them.
I agree.
That's their mobile home, their remote, you know.
I think the
But
parks
we're
are
not
completely
talking
different.
about them.
We're not talking about
And I think that's what, maybe when those, if they ever renew their PUD or something, we can discuss the extension of that. But that hasn't changed. None of that's
No,
changed.
none of it's
Same
changed.
way it's always been.
So it's
But I
just
think this
the,
is really the people who aren't in
Transient.
those parks that we're really concerned.
Yeah.
Right, and
If they're in an RV
keep it in
park,
mind
it's
that a
not.
mobile home park and an RV park are drastically
Unless they-
different things.
Right.
But we
Unless
have
they
a
add
lot of
on,
them down in the south
then
part
it
of the
goes
county
into
that
the
are
new
living
rules.
on acreages with somebody that's
Park.
allowing them to stay there while they're working down in DeSoto. There's a lot of folks like that.
but
It's like, you're not supposed to
they're
do
not
that. That's
supposed to
not
do
allowed.
that. That's not allowed.
Well,
I know.
I live in real.
we haven't got any complaints.
Yeah, but Mike, you know, if you got this is
But that's
really,
not allowed,
this is,
and I
if they can
understand
do
that.
this for a year, then they can approve another year. 2 years is plenty at the most. I don't think we don't need to go
Are they charging?
go any further.
Because if they are, then it
I don't
becomes a
ask about
business. I mean,
I haven't
it becomes
asked that.
commercial, the property
So-
becomes a commercial
So-
use if they're renting.
So if
I
we can
mean,
just slide this in under that other exception, then I.
Yeah,
Yeah, but the
again,
thing is everybody okay? Y'all killing this horse. Are you okay with 1 year, then the possibility of an extension to 2 years being the max? Is that okay with everybody?
on,
Outside of RV park.
Yeah, outside that, yeah.
Anything but RV.
Yeah.
parks. I want no limits on
Yep.
RV
Are we okay with that?
They expand their footprint.
You
Vicky?
can do that
I'm
in
okay
house,
with
or
that.
do we need to pass it?
Vicky,
administratively.
yeah, that, done.
Done, let's go home.
We
We
good?
have our direction.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Give me that hammer, Joe.
Make a motion.
Motion to, work session. Let's do it.
That's right.
In line.
We're done.
You got it.